Hello and welcome to the Mental Health Reform Podcast, where we shine a light on mental health in Ireland. Today we are thrilled to welcome Sheila Gilheaney, CEO of Alcohol Action Ireland, the leading independent advocate in Ireland for reducing alcohol-related harm. Sheila has been at the helm of Alcohol Action Ireland since 2019 and brings a unique blend of scientific expertise and policy leadership to the organisation. Her work focuses on driving evidence-based policy change, from implementing legislation to advocating for stronger protections for children and communities. Sheila also brings deep experience from previous leadership roles in science and education, and she plays a key role in European alcohol policy through her work in Eurocare. Sheila, thank you so much for being here.
Well, thank you. So happy to be here, Stephen. Really appreciate the opportunity to talk about what is an important topic.
And Sheila, before we start into recent developments, could you provide listeners maybe with a little more information about Alcohol Action Ireland and possibly what brought you to the role in 2019?
Yeah, so AAI is going for quite a long time and founded back in 2003. And it actually came about as a recommendation from a report that was put in place, like a government report, that really looking and saying, what are the harms that are coming from alcohol? And there was a recognition of the need for, I suppose, civil society for people who had a deep interest in policy and kind of bringing different voices, in that space and seeing the need for it to be amplified. So we're very fortunate. Most of our funding actually comes from the HSE. We spend our time researching policy throughout the world and trying to look at what are the things that are happening in other countries? What are the possible solutions to some of the harms that we see in Ireland? How could we adapt them to work here in Ireland? And how can we bring those solutions to government, to policymakers? So that's essentially what we do. We research lots of different topics within alcohol, and it's a very, very broad kind of a way of things. So we could be talking about pricing, marketing, talk about services, we could be talking about the impact of alcohol in children and lots of different ways. And we look and see what's the evidence and then try to bring that to government. For myself, why did I get involved? I, as it happens, come from a physics background and had previously worked in policy and how to make things better for people from a physics perspective, and so was interested in that policy space. And I love data. I really do love data, and that would kind of come from a kind of physics astronomy background of how can you best make your understanding what's the data that you need around that. So I haven't worked in that for quite a number of years. When the AI thing came out, for some reason it just spoke to me. I just I remember looking at the ad and thought, oh my God, that's really something I would like to be involved in. And it's hard to pinpoint exactly what it was, but I will just say, even growing up as a child, like everybody, I have come from a family that has been impacted by alcohol. There's not a family in Ireland that hasn't had impacts, and so not my immediate family, but just the kind of a little bit further out from that. And I always remember walking up the Derry Road in Omagh and my mother saying, muttering under her breath, she was giving out, there was a big poster, it was advertising a beer, Carling Black Label, back in the day, and she was annoyed. I knew she was annoyed. Just, that's not right. She was muttering under her breath. I was quite young. I was like 5 or 6, 7, that kind of age, And she said, there could be somebody who's maybe trying to give up or has just given up alcohol. It's had a problem or whatever, and it's trying to give it up. And they should be able to walk up the Derry Road and not actually be besieged, besailed with an advertisement, like that. And she never said much more about advertising. That was like the one and only thing that I ever heard her say, but that stuck with me. And there was an unfairness about it. And when it came to looking at AI and looking at the work, I was very struck by, we come up and it's really from a human rights perspective. And I do feel that people should be able to walk in their own town and not be under siege and not be submerged in alcohol marketing that normalises a product that tells you that it's essential for everyday life. And it's actually a product that kills 4 people every day, causes untold damage to families, to children, and actually costs the state an awful lot of money as well. Money that could be better spent in sports or whatever else. So all of that can combine together to bring me into this world that tries to make a difference about Ireland's most widespreadly, most harmful drug.
So many years later, you maybe heard your mother's voice there when you're applying for the role. So Sheila, we can't discuss young people's mental health honestly while ignoring alcohol's role in emotional distress. Beyond physical issues, there's also the truth that it's a socially accepted depressant. I mean, anecdotally, there may be a feeling that the next generation are less interested in alcohol and more interested in sipping green matches or early starts for yoga, but the data paints a very different picture. Can you tell us more about your recent research?
Yeah, so we published a report there, and which basically asked the question, what's the real picture about youth drinking? As you say, there's a bit of there's a tale that's out there that says, Gen Z, they're not drinking at all. So they're more into their going to the gym or whatever and things like this. And yes, they are interested in going to the gym, but they also do drink. And it's very much the case that in the last decade, we have seen quite a steep rise in youth drinking. So if you were to look at the age group 15 to 24-year-olds, there has been a rise from in that cohort. Back in 2016, about 66%, 2/3 would have been drinking. Now, as in 2025, that's gone up to 78%. There's a huge rise. There's a 12% rise. Even in the last year alone, there was a 3% rise. So that's data that's coming from Healthy Ireland surveys. There is some good news, because I will say that the average age at which we're starting to drink, that has gone up. So about 2 decades ago, it used to be people were starting to drink around 14, 15. It's actually gone up to 16, 17, and that's a positive. But what we find is that when people do start to drink, that they are likely to drink in what's described as hazardous ways. So there's a lot of binge drinking that go on. 2/3 of people who drink in that age group would be described as hazardous drinkers. We know that across Europe, Ireland has the second highest level of drinking. Actually, that's across OECD countries. So we have, and a lot of that is driven by that youth drinking that's there. And binge drinking is particularly dangerous because, on a very immediate basis, you can find yourself having falls, having accidents. We see people more likely to get into assaults, getting sick. You see that impact on people's mental health. You see it like in terms of the next day not feeling themselves, feeling that bit more down. And then longer term, if you kind of continue with that, you're just much, much more likely to see problems like having an alcohol use disorder. 1/3 of people in that age group would have an alcohol use disorder. About 8% would be at the extreme end, would maybe actually becoming dependent on alcohol. But 43,000 would fall into that kind of category. But you also see it as you're more likely to have, issues like a liver disease is sadly much more likely to come up, and we do see rising levels of liver disease within our younger population. But you also see it in their mental health. And we talk so much about, issues about depression and anxiety in Ireland. That has become mainstream to talk about that, which is really good. But what isn't mainstream is to be saying, well, look, we have a population where, a youth population where 2/3 are drinking hazardously. Of course, there's going to be an impact on their mental health.
Maybe for our listeners and myself, you could clarify the definition of binge drinking.
So binge drinking is drinking more than 6 standard drinks on a drinking occasion. And by a standard drink, I would mean a half pint of beer, small glass of wine, a pub measure of spirits. So that's a definition there. So 3 pints of beer, going above that, you're putting yourself into binge drinking. And that's heavy episodic drinking. I mean, that definition doesn't come out of nowhere. It's to do with it's basically a medical thing of, what can your body actually absorb and manage to, work through process.
Sheila, what do you think is driving this rebound, especially given the sense out there that the youth drinking was becoming less of a problem?
In public health terms, we would always say, and World Health Organization would talk about this, that, there are 3 big drivers of alcohol consumption, and that would be price, marketing, and availability. So really just talk there about availability, that we see a lot of alcohol around us. It's very easy to get, it's very close to us, with long opening hours. That's one element. From a pricing point of view, excise duties are a way of controlling price in Ireland. There has been no increase in excise duties since 2014, which, if you look at something like smoking, for example, you would see literally every year in the budget, considerable levels of excise duties being added. So, the price of a pack of cigarettes just gone up and up and up. And if you look at, smoking, levels of smoking, we're now down to about 17% of the population would smoke. So with alcohol, we haven't seen dramatic price differences because of excise duties. One thing that was introduced recently in 2022 was minimum unit pricing. So there's now a level beneath which you can't sell alcohol. And that was definitely a positive thing. But you know what? All that did was it brought the price of alcohol in 2022 back to where it had been 2 decades previously. So it had got incredibly cheap, and now it's just very cheap, is what I'm saying. So those three things combine to give us an environment that's very alcohol friendly. Looking at the third pillar there, the advertising, we do have some restrictions on alcohol marketing. Alcohol advertising that was brought in through the Public Health Alcohol Act, that was passed in 2018, with a very explicit idea of reducing the amount of advertising that children were seeing. And there's good stuff in that, but it has been very slow to be implemented. So, for example, there are restrictions on the advertising of alcohol on TV and on radio. So the broadcast watershed. So you don't see alcohol ads before 9 o'clock on TV. That was passed in 2018, but it only came into effect last year in 2025. So you have good legislation implemented very slowly. And I would also say now that advertising restriction, while very, very good and very useful, how many people are watching TV at the moment? So where they're actually watching and where they're spending, where their screen time is mostly coming from is online. And there are no restrictions, there are no statutory restrictions on alcohol advertising online. There's a huge gap that needs to be addressed in that statutory way, of looking at the advertising, as well as looking at those other things about, say, pricing and availability.
You quoted the excise duty that can be applied to cigarettes, and it's great that number is going down. Cigarettes are not part of our national identity. Is there a cultural component to a fear of reducing alcohol intake in Ireland?
Do you know, a lot of people will talk about this cultural effect. I would say, well, where does that cultural effect come from? It comes from a very powerful industry which explicitly connects their product to our national identity. And while people may say, but surely we've always had a problem with alcohol, I would sort of say, if you go back to the 1960s, we were drinking about half, on a per capita basis, we were drinking about half of what we're drinking today. So we were drinking about 6 litres per capita. That actually went up to, that nearly trebled. And it has come back a little bit, from those times. The Public Health Alcohol Act that I mentioned, we're now drinking 15% less today than we were drinking in 2018. So that, you can see you can change the environment in which people are there by bringing in some modest controls on price, marketing and availability. But really, until we actually tackle an industry, and a very powerful industry, which so firmly equates its product with our Irish identity, it will be difficult for legislation to achieve what it could achieve.
And would you have a message for parents who feel that underage drinking is permissible as long as it's under their roof and under their control?
I can understand where parents, would be coming from on that, and they'll say, oh, in France, they have a glass of wine or whatever, and there's all these, kind of things. If we look at the facts, what we actually find is, and there's a lot, actually massive amount of research is done on that, which shows that, if a parent gives a child alcohol, that they're more likely to drink, and they're more likely to drink at very high levels. So the message is actually very clear. It's against the law for a start off, like to sell alcohol to a child. So there's a reason for that. We know that if you start to drink at a young age, you're more likely to run into a problem at a later date. So we would definitely say, and the advice right across the world is, don't give alcohol to a child.
Are there examples from other countries you think Ireland could be following to better protect young people from alcohol harm?
Oh, absolutely. And there's a few outstanding examples. So the Nordic countries, is where you tend to look. First of all, Norway in particular is the outstanding example of this. So Norway has a complete ban on alcohol advertising. No, just total ban, and that's online as well. And it's just clear, straightforward. It's not hedging around and saying, oh, this or that, or the complete ban. And what they would say is that the evidence would suggest that that led to a 7% drop in alcohol consumption in Norway. There are other countries as well. Lithuania would be a very good example of that, a country with, you know, a pretty bad history, of alcohol troubles. But over the past 2 decades, they have really looked at this and they've taken that public health approach of controls, price, marketing, availability. And over a very short time, you could see it actually within 5 to 10 years, they saw, for example, a reduction in alcohol-related deaths by about a quarter. So that's a huge amount of lives that are saved. And with determination and with political will, it's astonishing what can be turned around.
And part of your research, Sheila, calls out the role of online and digital alcohol marketing and how zero alcohol or non-alcoholic products are used to circumvent advertising restrictions. Could you tell me a little bit about how big of a problem this is in shaping youth culture around drinking?
Come back to that Public Health Alcohol Act. We have, Ireland has been a leader, has been really, really good in this. And one of the things that it has done is to try and reduce the amount of alcohol advertising that young people, that children in particular, are seeing, because we know that if you see alcohol marketing, they're much more likely to drink, and if they're already drinking, to drink even more. So that's the rationale behind that. So it put into place fairly modest things. So you can't have billboard advertising, outdoor advertising within 200 metres of a school or in a public park. You can't advertise in public transport. You can't advertise on the field of play of a sports match, just the field of play. You can advertise all your billboards, but just on the field of play. And you can't advertise in shops outside of an alcohol zone. And what we have seen is that in all of those areas that I've just mentioned, in all of those areas, there's now a massive amount of advertising for zero alcohol products. And you might say, sure, it's zero alcohol products. What's the problem? The problem is that they're using identical branding. So the vast majority of zero alcohol products, or no-lows, come from major brands. And they actually only make up quite a small proportion of the market. They make up about 1%. Zero alcohol products make up 1% of the total alcohol market. But if you look at their advertising spending, say in that outdoor space that I was talking about, they make up about 25% of ads in the outdoor space. So that kind of tells you something, why would an industry for only 1% of its market, even though it is growing, spend such a huge amount of money if it wasn't advertising their brand? And we also know there's increasingly in our research from multiple jurisdictions. I was just reading a report a few weeks ago from Scotland, which shows up in children see these 0.0 ads. What they see is an alcohol ad. And out of the mouth of babes, there's truth. That's what's been advertised. So we would say, and we would be calling on government that, if you're going to advertise a product that shares the same branding as a major alcohol, then it needs to be subject to the same regulations as alcohol advertising.
Alcohol Action Ireland has been at the forefront of pushing for mandatory alcohol health information labels to be rolled out to tell people clearly about risks such as cancer, liver disease, pregnancy harm. Sheila, why do you think this rollout has been stalled, and what does that say to the political will in Ireland, and what needs to happen now to get this measure back on track?
What we saw was an industry flexing its muscles. They had always objected to this. They particularly objected to one of the lines in it, and the label, which says that alcohol can cause fatal cancers, which is the truth. There's at least 7 cancers. 1 in 8 breast cancers here in Ireland is caused by alcohol. So they went all out to do what they could against it, which they had already been doing for the previous number of years, objecting to it. At the start of last year, 2025, the latest, I suppose, lever that was used was the threat of tariffs. And suddenly it became, we can't possibly deal with this. We're having to deal with these tariffs. This will destroy our exports. And there was all sorts of red herrings. There was a shoal of red herrings that were thrown out. And they said things like, this will affect our exports. It wasn't going to affect our exports. It only applies to products that have been sold in Ireland. There was, stuff like we couldn't possibly, afford to put on these labels, even though we got a 3-year lead in China. And even though labels change frequently on alcohol products, as you would see, season specials would be a common one. And they got the ear of the government. And they got that by demanding meetings with government. In the period between January and April last year, we saw at least 7 meetings with senior members of government, including the Taoiseach, the Taoiseach and other ministers for enterprise. So there was an enormous effort being made to do that. Public health jumped up. They really did an enormous amount of work, not just ourselves, but almost 80 different organisations, public health organisations, and people in the coalface, really dealing with what the impact of alcohol is. Writing to government, writing to ministers, expressing their concern. Internationally, it was a very big deal because Ireland was going to be the first country to have this very comprehensive label, including the cancer label. So, it was ready at attracting a huge amount of attention. So, about a dozen international organisations, including representatives from the World Health Organization, wrote really to the government, appealing to them to say, Ireland has shown the way here. Other countries are watching what's happening. If Ireland goes ahead, other countries will definitely follow. Keep with it. But it didn't work. What we saw is a delay now till September 2028. Governments say they will definitely keep to that. Our job from here on in is to hold them to that. And I will say one of the interesting things is that because it had already been announced, this original start date May 2026, in the last few months you would have seen actually some alcohol products starting to carry the label. Coming up to Christmas, we say that probably about half of all wines were starting to carry it. After Christmas, we started to see some of those wines and beers and spirits take those labels off, which in itself points to a couple of things. Firstly, when they want to do it, they can do it. And when they want to take it off, they can take it off. And so it's not too difficult. It's not too expensive a thing to be able to take a label off. And I'm taking heart. And I'm saying, we have managed to get it this far. We have to just keep going with it.
Because Ireland has been trailblazers before. I remember when the smoking ban came in, people said it couldn't be done.
No.
Even putting a tariff on a shopping bag, on a plastic recycling bag. And elsewhere in the world, we see Australia has banned social media for under 16s. They've got a big lobby group to fight against in terms of social media giants. They were able to put that through, and now we can see that there's an interest. Once somebody takes one step forward, then Ireland is considering it as well. So we do have that capacity and that momentum for change.
Yeah, we do. And I think we need to, I suppose, remind government, they're actually the people in charge here, and to listen to the evidence and not to be taken in by spin.
St. Patrick's Day is just around the corner. If you could send one message to young people, parents, policymakers about alcohol use and harm this year, what would it be?
Well, we're all about sending the message to the policymakers. And I suppose the message that I would say to young people is to say, look, you're getting all this encouragement to drink. And whose interest is that? Is for an enormously wealthy multinational alcohol companies, and kind of say, who are selling you a message that this is a risk-free product and it is essential to your identity. I'd say maybe just take a step back from that and sort of look at, why would an industry spend so much money trying to persuade you about a product which is carcinogenic, which is addictive, which is mood altering, and which actually causes a substantial amount of harm here in Ireland. So that's one thing that I would say to anybody, and to young people in particular. Much more strongly, I want to be saying to government, why do we want to have our national identity associated with this product? We have a new strategy coming out for drugs and alcohol. We would hope that there will be stronger measures in that we will look particularly at things like the advertising of alcohol online, and say it's time for us to kind of look at the data, look at what can be done, and stand up for Ireland as Ireland and not a multinational industry.
Thank you so much. And if people have any more queries about Alcohol Action Ireland, or how to advocate or help use their voice, where would you point to me?
So if you go onto our website, alcoholireland.ie, and you'll see our various campaigns, and we love people to get involved. One of the things people do a lot of for us is to contact their TDs through our website on particular issues, be it labelling or treatment services or whatever. But hopefully you'll see something that's maybe of interest and add your name, your voice to making Ireland a better place.
Sheila, thank you so much for your time this morning. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.